We know about it. Some of us dread it. Some of us look forward to it. Hopefully we're all preparing to navigate it powerfully and intentionally on our own terms. But have you ever stopped to wonder why menopause even exists? You're listening to the Health Courage Collective podcast, episode 173. Why is menopause a thing? Welcome to the Health Courage Collective podcast, the show for women who are too busy to slog through hours of generalized, inapplicable, and often contradictory health information, but too smart to ignore that a few minutes of focused attention now can prevent years of suffering in the future. I'm your host, Christina Hackett, a pharmacist who doesn't want you to live on prescriptions, a certified coach specifically trained to maximize your potential, and a compulsive learner obsessed with preventative, cutting-edge, holistic, and integrative medicine. I'm on a mission to increase your physical and mental resilience so you can fearlessly look forward to your next 40-plus limitless years. Your time is now. Let's go. Hi, my friend, and welcome to today's episode. How is your tendency to be a librarian? That's one of my favorite concepts to remind myself of. Collecting and organizing and analyzing and cataloging a bunch of good ideas is good. It's actually my idea of a good time, but it doesn't change your life. You have to step out of the library and onto the battlefield and actually do some stuff, some hard stuff, some potentially painful stuff to be a true forward-thinking philosopher. Today, we're going to talk about why menopause exists. Have you ever thought about it before? I never had. If I had thought about it, which I hadn't, I would have thought that all female animals went through menopause. I have a 10-year-old pet chicken named Bonnie Parker. She's a Plymouth Rock chicken, which is the kind that's like kind of black and white striped sort of. She's very cute. Anyway, she's way old for a chicken and she hasn't laid an egg for like 2 or 3 years, so she's my little menopausal friend. As it turns out, though, most female animals usually die shortly after their ability to reproduce ends. There are a few exceptions, mostly with pampered animals in captivity, which applies to Bonnie the chicken. Even chimpanzees, our closest relatives, die shortly after menopause. The only animal species known to significantly outlive their fertility are certain whales like killer whales, some Asian elephants, possibly some giraffes, and one species of insect called the Japanese aphid. But generally, since life is all about perpetuation of the species, there's no reason to keep living past your ability to reproduce. So, why do human women live such a large percentage of their life after their reproductive years are over? Let's back up and talk about some changes women go through throughout their lifetime. We know that our bodies change in incredible ways over our lifetime. Big changes at puberty, huge changes if you were ever pregnant, changes if you breastfed, and more changes at menopause. But did you know that your brain physically changes in significant ways also? In her books, XX Brain and Menopause Brain, neuroscientist Lisa Mosconi explains this all so well. If you think of what, say, a 17-year-old girl is capable of and can be responsible for compared to a 9-year-old girl, you'd think that her brain has grown. But actually, the brain shrinks during puberty. Half of the brain's original neurons are shed and connections between them are scaled back. This is to make the brain leaner and meaner and puts lots of cognitively demanding multi-step tasks on autopilot, and it eventually expands in volume again. The biggest and quickest physical changes to our brains happen during pregnancy and the postpartum period. Pregnancy causes a rapid and extensive reduction in gray matter. In fact, if you feed a simple computer algorithm pictures of brain scans of women before and after pregnancy, the computer can tell with complete accuracy whether the woman had been pregnant or not. Again, like puberty, the reduction in brain size is not a bad thing. Changes need to happen in the brain for a woman to become the superhero that her baby needs her to be. In fact, the greater the reduction in gray matter, the stronger the bond between mom and baby. It's becoming a leaner and meaner situation again. Some skills become second nature and the brain doesn't need to spend as much time or energy on them. And some new skills are required, like knowing how to respond to the needs of a helpless human who can't talk. So the brain changes to accommodate. Eventually, brain volume slowly increases again. The brain also changes at menopause. It gets smaller in size again, discarding some information and skills it no longer needs. And in the transition, that can feel disorienting. Just like with puberty and pregnancy, it can feel disconcerting to forget things or have unexpected mood swings. Our world can feel almost scary during perimenopause. With puberty and pregnancy, though, we celebrate that time of life and know that any changes or challenges are normal and part of that life phase. We throw quinceañeras and baby showers and approach hormonal-related brain changes with optimism and support. But menopause is often derided or dreaded. Lisa Mosconi describes this all really well in her book. She says that entire bodies of literature portray menopause as a medical mess. But if menopause was such a catastrophe, no woman would be able to remain functional for another 30 or more years. Dr. Mosconi says that while menopause is a fact of life for anyone with ovaries, it's actually a long-standing biological riddle. Charles Darwin postulated that if the main purpose of the female is to propagate the species, then going through menopause many years before dying should be selected against, unless there are distinct advantages to it. So why hasn't it been selected against? If menopause is a vulnerability to our species, why haven't we evolved past it? Could it be because it's awesome? Because it's what has helped humankind survive and evolve to such high levels of reason and cooperation? Something we're not often told about menopause is that the results of many studies show that postmenopausal women, after they've gotten through the symptoms of perimenopause, have feelings of more meaning and purpose and are generally happier than younger women, happier than they themselves were before menopause. They have better mental health and a greater contentment with life. There's a great figure in her book, Menopause Brain, that shows that life satisfaction steadily declines for the first 5 years leading up to menopause, with the lowest point being 1 year before menopause. Then it gradually goes back up even higher than baseline over the 10 years post-menopause. It's a bit of a renaissance of interest and conviction. Neuroscientists like Lisa Mosconi are showing that some of those brain changes that happen during menopause cause our brains to rearrange our connections between our amygdala and our prefrontal cortex. The amygdala becomes less reactive to negative emotions, the result of which is greater emotional control. Sadness and anger don't hold the same charge that they once did, while our ability to stay in joy, wonder, and gratitude increases. Empathetic concern and sympathy also increase after menopause. It makes sense that hormonal pregnancy brain changes help us be better at caring for an infant. But why would nature go through all this work to have us go through hormonal brain changes in our 50s that make us happier, more interested in the world, more caring, and less reactive? The prevailing theory of menopause is called the evolutionary mismatch hypothesis. That menopause is the unnatural result of our increased life expectancy, an unfortunate upshot of living longer than nature intended, a fluke resulting from modern medicine being able to keep us alive. But an alternative hypothesis is taking shape that says that the exact opposite might be true. A woman's contribution to perpetuation of the species goes far beyond her ability to pop out babies. Ecologist George G. Williams developed a hypothesis in 1957 that menopause is actually an evolutionary adaptation, a good one. Nobody paid much attention to him. Recently, Dr. Kristen Hawkes, a professor of anthropology at the University of Utah, my alma mater, has been collecting field research data from the Hadza tribe, a modern hunter-gatherer society in northern Tanzania. She was studying them as a way to get an idea of how our hunter-gatherer ancestors were able to survive. She found that the majority of calories needed for sustaining life for the whole group came from women. The men go out hunting all day, every day, and are successful about 3% of the time. The women brought home calories pretty much 100% of the time by picking berries, fruits, and tubers. When younger women of the group gave birth and had to nurse their babies, coalitions of postmenopausal women went about the gathering and feeding responsibilities. Many studies actually show that grandmas do a huge part of the work of keeping the entire village alive. They stopped being reproductive but kept being productive. This new theory is called the grandmother hypothesis. Grandmas maximize perpetuation of the species by keeping young women able to produce and care for more babies. Young women don't have to choose between foraging for food or caring for their infants. They can care for their infants and their mom will bring back food for them and the entire village. The odds of the species surviving increase dramatically when grandmas are able to keep the village fed and care for babies and children when young moms are unable to. It's possible, too, that this contributed to a survival of the fittest kind of gene selection favoring longevity, too. The theory there, it's still just a theory, is that sometimes everyone gets hungry and dies. Then their genes are not passed on. But sometimes kids who have grandmas to help feed them live while everyone else who doesn't have a grandma dies. And the kids with grandmas are able to pass their genes on. But the kids with grandmas, the ones who were able to pass their genes on, didn't have just any old grandma. They had a grandma who survived childbirth, probably several births, and was tough and wily enough to stay alive a long time and remain strong enough to be able to care for 2 generations. Those are the genes that were passed on throughout human evolution. So that's why more people predisposed to live past menopause exist. It makes sense to me. What do you think? This way, menopausal women are ensuring the survival of their genes without having to produce more babies. Maybe even more efficiently than if they had been able to keep having babies. As we get older, healing takes longer. Can you imagine having to recover from childbirth in your 70s? Lisa Mosconi describes research on killer whales in her book. They're the coolest. Whether it's ethical for them to be in captivity is a question beyond my understanding, but last April we went to San Antonio to be in the zone of totality for the eclipse, and we watched the actual eclipse from SeaWorld San Antonio. Of course, while we were there, we went to a killer whale show, and it's so amazing what they can train them to do. They're so smart. Anyway, killer whales are one of the few animals that live after menopause, and they have a matriarchal society. Once killer whales become grandmas, they get reading glasses and learn to knit. Actually, I think taking up pickleball is the new thing. Killer whale grandmas stay close by and help raise their grand calves, which is a huge help to their daughters and daughters-in-law who have extra help with the calves and no competition for mating with their males. Killer whale calves who have grandmas survive better because grandma helps source food for them and protect them. She's probably better at convincing them not to do dumb stuff than their mom is, too. According to SeaWorld's website, a 1-year-old killer whale calf eats 50 to 60 pounds of fish per day. So it's a huge help to have a second set of eyes watching over and protecting vulnerable babies and helping to fill their bottomless stomachs. We humans distinguish ourselves by our ability to use thoughts and reasoning and foresight and hindsight and empathy and intention to direct our behavior. And whose brains have physically changed to be able to have more empathy and less reactivity to negative emotions? Who has lived through difficult experiences and gained untold wisdom from the school of hard knocks? Postmenopausal women. Whether they're genetic grandmas or not, they provide so much value to society and really bring out the best in humankind. So, why is menopause a thing? While anthropologists work out the burden of proof, I choose to believe that it's not a fluke of modern medicine that some sniveling, shriveling ladies are able to stay alive longer than nature intended. I think postmenopausal women have been and continue to be an indispensable asset that has allowed humankind to survive and thrive and reach a potential that would have not been possible any other way. Thank you so much for being here today. Next week is the last Wednesday before Election Day here in the US, so we're going to talk about who you need to vote for. Don't worry, it's not remotely political in any way. Until then, look forward to being one of the heroines responsible for saving the human race, and don't be normal. Thank you so much for tuning into the Health Courage Collective podcast. I am truly honored that you have paid me the enormous compliment of your time and attention. I would be so grateful if you would share this podcast with someone you know and subscribe so you never miss an episode. This podcast is for entertainment and information purposes only. Statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Christina Hackett and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse events by use of information contained herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed